running, taking cover from ISIS sniper fire and almost dodging bullets. I mean, the first day I went to the front line, I always think I shouldn't share this anecdote because it's a bit morbid, but I had a very, very close call. A couple of close calls, but we were chatting with the Iraqi soldiers close to the front line, not on the front line, but they were taking a break. They were having their lunch. And the battle was a little bit ahead. They were liberating a village near Mosul. Anyway, we were just sitting down, taking a break. And these soldiers asked me to stand up for a picture with them.
I think the most extraordinary thing about my conversation today with Claire Thomas is how the conversation changes so dramatically within 20 minutes of us talking. Because what you've just heard is certainly not the tone of how we began our chat. But it's a reminder to me that photography can really take us to places that would otherwise either not thought possible logistically or even feasible on a personal or mental level. Very few of the stories shared on this show from photojournalists who work in the places our passports are less likely to be stamped start from some kind of gun-ho stance. And Claire's life behind a lens goes from taking travel snaps, if I can use that colloquialism, I know not everybody feels comfortable with that, be included, to full-framed, pun intended, photographs that bear witness to a crisis unfolding. Photographers don't generally choose to get their war on, as it were, is what I'm trying to say. There have been some, granted, who did and very deliberately set out upon that path, and I remember very well for the conversation that took a real surprise turn when his girlfriend turned out to be a hired assassin. That chat with Jason P. Howe way back in episode 244, he shared how he worked at a camera store just to save up every penny he could to travel back and forth to Colombia to photograph a very bloody civil war. The honesty of Claire's work I found outstanding when I first saw it and during our conversation, and as you're about to find out, this intention behind her photography, this fervour to share the truth, may in part owe its origins to organising mattresses to be sent to women suffering from HIV and AIDS and having to sleep on a hard floor in a clinic. So my guest today tells stories that, they're a challenge to most people's social norms, but she also tells stories of hope, many stories of hope, as you'll find out. I've said this a few times of late, and I find myself saying it again, but there's a second episode to come featuring Claire, of that I'm sure. And if this is an amuse-bouche to whet your appetite, it's a pretty convincing one, I think. Her editorial clients include the New York Times, the Sunday Times, the Guardian, National Geographic, the BBC, Greenpeace, Newsweek, Al Jazeera, and she works regularly with United Nations agencies and Amnesty International, Oxfam and Save the Children. It's a pretty impressive CV. But it's a CV just like the conversation you're about to hear, because it has a reminder baked into the page which definitely interrupts the accolades and very impressive partners. Something that brings you back down to earth when you read the words, Claire is trained in battlefield first aid and surviving hostile environments and is available for assignments worldwide. Today on the Photo Walk.
Heath is a man of few words. Everybody knows that about him. Compliments are hard to come by from him, but when he does give a compliment, it really packs a punch kind of thing. And all he said to me, he looked at the pictures and he said, I think you should invest in a good camera. Pictures can transform emotions into action that can benefit people positively. We're always going to be looking for those pictures that cause you to linger long enough to read what the story's about. So Katie was rushing to get her into an ambulance and looking around for a medic to go with her. There wasn't anybody available, so I said, look, I'll come. There's nothing I can do, but I'll come with you. And I don't think you can know this about yourself until you're in that situation. But in the most intense situations, I found myself quite calm. He was like, it doesn't matter what kind of picture and what risks you've taken. It could be the most impactful image of conflict or whatever. And then if somebody sends in a picture of a surfing rabbit, nobody's going to care about your conflict image anymore.
That's Claire Thomas, my guest on the show today. Welcome along as we make our photo walks together, a show where we walk and make pictures, photographically sketchbooking our time together each week, accompanied by the letters and inspirational stories you have sent in, plus talking with special guests from around the world. I'll take a peek into that mailbag in a moment for a flavour of today's letters we have. But before that, thank you to those who believe in the podcast enough that you're now Patreon members or extra milers, and to MPB who sponsor this show. It's 2025, perhaps a time, as I said last week, to think about that stuff you need to be creative this year, the kit, or a time to sell some kit that you've not used for a while now. A service I use for buying, selling and trading used camera gear is MPB. As a website platform, mpb.com is the place where I can safely buy, sell and trade quality used photo and video gear online. And online guarantees make this a place I feel safe to buy from, unlike some other marketplaces. Here's how it works. You go online to mpb.com and search for gear that you'd like to add to your kit bag. Or if you're selling gear you no longer need, click the button at the top of the website that says Start Selling and Trading and just follow the very easy instructions. From there, you print off a packing label, stick it on the box with all your gear in it. It's collected by a courier free of charge from your front door. And the best bit, MPB pays you for your camera gear within days. So join me and the hundreds of thousands of photographers every year in the US, Europe and the UK who know that MPB is the place to buy, sell, trade and create. Right, on the show today from the mailbag, Tim Bindner thinks he's cracked it. He has perhaps the true creative why. Bob Shonkoff has insomnia, but's turned it into a photographic opportunity. Lynn, Fraser and David Higton are making proper pictures of proper snow. And Mark Krajnak is celebrating Hogmanay in a place far from Scottish shores, burning wishes on the fire of Hog and making some pictures. Plus there's this month's one-word assignment set by Ted Forbes and almost a last call to join us for encounters. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, I've got that. Check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, or snow boots actually for some of our walkers, check. Have you got some spare film or an extra SD card? Check. And a handy kit bag sized dictionary to look up well, we'll find out the word later. Let's walk.
I definitely have a few favourite walks that I take when I'm recording these episodes, and this is one of them. Can you guess where I am? Is it Greenham Common, Neil? Oh, you're good, you are. Very good. I've always wondered what these are, though. These, I'll pop a picture. I'll take a sketchbook image and I'll put it on the show page. They stick out the ground. There's a few of them. There's, I don't know, about half a dozen of them at this once former airbase, and I think they would have had lights on them or something. But I'm not sure. Answers on a postcard, please, if you know what they are. Let me get a sketchbook image. I've got my X100, they're faithful with me today. And 320 ISO, it's a bit of a blur day, sky-wise. Ooh, look at it. Grim and grey. F4, 160 ISO, and there we go. It's not a big competition as such, but if you know what this is, let me know. A couple of weeks ago, when we were having our monthly Extra Mile Zoom together, one of our newest supporters and contributors, Bob Shonkoff, told a short story about making photographs in the dead of night. That just simply, it grabbed me by the short and curlies, this one. It was one of those, it was also a sort of light bulb moment as well, of sorts. A kind of eureka moment as well, in terms of what to do with your photography. So let me read you his letter, and then the pictures will be on the show page today that go along with this story. Hello, Neil. I've been listening to your podcast for a few months now and enjoy the content and the insights that you provide. Thank you, Bob. Like discovering and then adding, wait for it, Garibaldi biscuits to my kit bag. Not easy to find in the San Francisco Bay Area. Crawford's, Bob. That's what you need to discover the pure joy of dead fly biscuits in the States. Dead fly biscuits, Neil. Yes, dead fly biscuits. Are you sure you want your audience to be eating dead fly biscuits served up as a sweet treat? Keep your lens caps on. Dead flies are just the name that we gave them as kids, because the currents that are in these biscuits, they look, well, we always say they're like dead flies. They don't want. I can't believe I turned them down in my youth. I'm not having one of those. Give you something like a ginger biscuit or a chocolate hobnob if they were around. But no, I used to turn these down. They're now my favourite. They are. Yes, because the currents look like dead flies just sat there floating in the biscuit. That's why. Anyway, Bob says, now that I've enlisted as an extra miler, I felt somewhere between intrigued and duty-bound to join the most recent Zoom meetup, and I planned to simply observe. That wasn't until you asked us to share some ideas and projects if we had them, so I raised my digital hand, shared, and now I'm once again sharing with this letter. See, Bob, this is fantastic. You're now fully involved. For some background, as a kid growing up in Brooklyn in New York in the 1960s, I wandered around with an Instamatic in my coat pocket. Bob, as Madonna once famously said, this used to be my playground, and what a playground you had with an Instamatic, eh? By my teens, writes Bob, I was shooting, processing and printing 35mm. I majored in cinema and photography at school, but regretfully lacked the confidence of making a decent living with it. So the next 4 decades were spent in the business of mass media, and my photographic dreams were largely placed on a back burner. But I always knew that there was a life lesson in there. And this, by the way, is the first idea or quote of what I'm affectionately now referring to as Bob's Bangers. Banger being a good thing, apparently, according to my 16-year-old. I always used to think a banger was an old car that was falling apart. But no, it's a good thing, Dad. Get with it. Banger equals sick, equals fire, equals nasty. Right you are, son. All those words mean good things. Yes, they do, Dad. So Bob's Banger number 1. When dreams go on the back burner, make sure to keep them simmering. Stir occasionally and be ready to serve when hungry. So with retirement came the opportunity to learn, explore and shoot on my own terms. I always understood the value of a photographic project, but as it turned out, it was a struggle for me. It was easier to comprehend than it was to find and commit to. But a few months back, I took a workshop with a Baryonyx Pirello. Now, we mentioned to Baryonyx last week, wonderful a Baryonyx, and I did have a note from him to say that he'd heard about the mention of support following the LA fires and the loss of his house, and that the support of all the photographic community around him is certainly precious to him and Cynthia. So again, if you know of a Baryonyx, you might well be aware of the loss of his house. I don't know, obviously, what went with the house. I would imagine many photographic memories and other family memories beside, but we sent our love to a Baryonyx last week. Bob continues, it was a workshop that a Baryonyx created during shelter in place, or lockdown, as we called it, Bob. I think your shelter in place, I always thought that sounded much less Shawshank than lockdown. It was appropriately designed to help photographers find a personal project within their own lives. In our first session, the other workshop participants shared their life experiences, and it became clear to me that I'd need to find something close to home that I would be consumed by, and as such, it'd probably need to be quite personal. As I laid in bed that first night, wide awake from my ongoing insomnia, wondering what possible project would unveil itself, something happened. I noticed the outside light streaming into my darkened bedroom dramatically streak across the ceiling. At that moment, I got out of bed, grabbed my camera and began shooting, moving from room to room. Inspiration, you see, had struck, and I found my project. Insomnia. That, by the way, is Bob Banger number 2. I began making images around my home to capture what it looked like, and then started creating abstractions of what it felt like. It pushed boundaries, as a good project probably should. In the following weeks, typically between the hours of 2 and 5 a.m., I wandered around my neighbourhood and then over to the nearby church garden and eventually into the town centre of the suburb I call home. There's a sense of courage in this one as well, Bob. Wandering around with your camera in the dead of night. I'm now near the end of this brutal months-long battle with insomnia, it seems, so I've chosen to wind down the shooting portion of the project and replace it with some much-needed sleep. Now, through more wakeful eyes, I've narrowed down the 300-plus images and processed them to a consistent colour palette. I've printed 4x6s and I'm pairing and sequencing them. Perhaps it'll be a zine, maybe a book, or, I don't know, a major motion picture. Well, maybe not that last one. Who knows, Bob, though? Who knows? Has there been a film called Insomnia? I'm sure there probably has. During this time, I learned a new word. Now, I think I've got this right, Bob. I've looked it up. I've listened to various YouTube pronunciations of it. Hypnagogia. It's defined as the transitional state between sleep and wakefulness. I spent a lot of time there, and I've come to believe it's a place where dreams can reveal themselves, just sitting there on the back burner and waiting for some stirring. Bob, I'm not just saying this because you're a new member of our very precious Extra Mile community, but I genuinely mean this when I say that is one of the most important stories I've had the privilege to read on this show. You might be thinking, what, really? All the letters you've read? Yeah, don't be mean. No, the reason I'm saying it is because from something like Insomnia, you've discovered this incredible creativity wrapped around it. The idea that photo projects can appear out of seemingly thin air and just nip at our prefrontal cortex, I think that's wonderful and often very true. It might surprise you to learn, I can be a real overthinker, but I think I get my best ideas or most enjoyable ideas when I'm not forcing it. Much like this podcast, actually. You know the story behind this. So to use a musical metaphor, as Paul McCartney once famously sang, someone's knocking at the door, do me a favour, open the door and let them in. And I really do believe that. At this point, I'd love to play a few bars from Let 'Em In, but excuse the archaic licensing laws in podcast sphere. You'll have to take a little of this thoughtful number instead that's coming up in the background. But I'll put Bob's website on the show page today, and also his Instagram. Fabulous idea, Bob. Really, Neil? Yes, really. Yes, really. I do mean really. Yes, really.
What's there to hold in the light of this moon? My mind keeps searching, but my heart decides thoughts can be cruel. They're not mine to hold. The space unravels when you let go.
The other thing that I find fascinating up at the airbase when I photograph, do you know what? I could walk these miles, and it is miles. If you wanted to do, this was once upon a time the longest runway in Europe. And I think, have I said this before? Or have I made this up in my sleep? I think it was one of those destinations that was on the map of, oh, Barnes, don't walk. Bark a lot, come over here, come on over here, there we go. It's one of those places that they had the long runway, or a long enough runway that it could be used for, excuse me, I'm trying to do two things at once, as you can probably hear. I'm focusing on a manhole cover, 250th, F4, 160. It's a manhole cover in the middle of nowhere. Yes, it was one of those runways that I think was earmarked as a place where the space shuttle could land if it needed to. Another one of those to show the context of this as a sketchbook picture of a manhole cover in the midst of nowhere. Yeah, a manhole cover in the midst of nowhere. There's a Talking Heads song called that, isn't there? No, that's The Road to Nowhere. Your letters, like Bob's, are very precious to this show. Please keep sending them in. That's what really drives this show forward. And the email address is stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. You don't have to send pictures. Sometimes it's just nice to hear about your experiences as you walk with your cameras. Right, I'm going to swap things around a little today and do the assignment for the month earlier than usual within the show. This one is from Ted Forbes, the educator, the photographer, the YouTuber, and he's really, I'm not going to do the realies again, captured your imagination. In my new 2025 drive to keep up to date with email, your entries, as I speak anyway, are all on the assignments page. And note to self, pop a note to Ted later today, as I know he'll want to look through these as they populate the page for the assignments page for Jan 2025. I just wanted to mention one from Joshua Shavitz, who's made a New Year resolution with a small r to take part in every assignment this year. This photograph, Josh says, brings back wonderful memories from a fantastic trip I had with my family to Kenya. We were involved in a research project on animal behaviour at the Impala Research Centre in Nanyuki. After diving into our work at the centre, we enjoyed exploring other beautiful parts of the country, and it's a long time since I've been to Kenya, but it is so beautiful, much of it really is. It was amazing. We were sorting through thousands of pictures of animals afterwards, quite the task. Spent every day visiting a nearby Maasai village as well. And amidst the lively demonstrations, I noticed this elder resting peacefully under a tree. The vibrant contrast of the red shuka against the rest of the scene caught my eye, and I couldn't resist making this picture, and it is an amazing picture. And if you don't know what a shuka is, you will find out when you go to the show page and see this photograph. There's a juxtaposition in this photo as well, in that this elder, against a backdrop of Africa, his part of Africa in Kenya, is sitting underneath this tree, and for shade, I would imagine, and he's sitting on it's a horrible plastic chair. So the juxtaposition of culture and new in that particular photograph. So yeah, there's lots of photos coming in. And although I do love to see new work for these challenges, after all, that's what the assignment is in purest terms, I'm also very happy for pictures from your archive like this one that you think may fit the challenge as well, because I think it does enrich the feature. It truly does. So if you don't know what this month's assignment is, you've probably had a weighty clue now within Josh's words. But all the same, here's Ted Forbes with what he'd like you to look out for.
The Photo Walk assignment.
I'll just pull one out. Let's say red.
Why red?
So I've gotten into this idea of, and it's not my idea, but studying Japanese aesthetics, visual aesthetics, that have kind of a collection of things in the 20th century that were amalgamation of trying to bring Eastern concepts to the West. But the whole idea of, there's one of the concepts called one red spot, where there's one red spot in the image. And what that means is not necessarily there's one red dot in the image, but it means that there's something that's contrasting to everything else in the image that's small in size, that carries a lot of weight. And I love that. I also find color to be very interesting too. It's something that I like to avoid when I shoot black and white. But when I do incorporate, I believe that it needs to be there for a reason. And what is interesting to me is the weight of color. And red is a really tough one because our eye is so tuned into it. There's a recent campaign that Leica's done on Instagram where they've done all these images that are predominantly red, and I think they're overdone. And I get it. they have one red dot on their cameras. But anyway, it's a little obvious. So here's the assignment: is go out and try and incorporate the color red some way, shape, or form. Try and use it as a contrast. Try and use it as something that's small in the composition but carries a lot of visual weight. I think that's a really interesting challenge.
Best of luck. Send your entries to stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show. If you can resize them to 2,500 pixels wide, you are an absolute star. But don't worry if you can't. I'll do the heavy lifting. No watermarks, no borders, please, but do include links to your social feeds, your website, Flickr, Glass, or wherever we can enjoy more of your work.
The Photo Walk assignment.
I'm off to Londinium tomorrow. If you're listening to this on the day of release, tomorrow. I should have a t-shirt. If you're listening to this on the day of release, t-shirts. It'll never catch on, Neil. You're probably right. Yes, to London tomorrow. I'm going with he who should never be questioned when it comes to shall we cut the red wire or the blue wire in terms of IT, Neil Ford. We're off to do a little further scouting for Encounters London, which now has 5 people booked on, with only a few spaces left, really. Thursday 24th, Friday the 25th of April, it's Encounters. It is a workshop of ideas and challenges and history, as I've organised 2 special photo walks atop the others we'll be doing together. It's a sort of a horrible histories of London. If that title wasn't taken, I'd have it. Day 1 in the evening, we're going to track the steps the infamous Jack the Ripper took, and then the second day, during the day, takes us further east in the city, or into the city, out of the city, in the city, for a Gangs of London walk. There will both be private walks for our team only. Atop that, and I've had some come in already, I've called on some guests that we've had on this show to set some special assignments to get your photographic teeth into. And it being called Encounters, one of the exercises we'll be working on or toward together is making a story about one person or one place. You'll be part of a podcast feature, so I'll be doing a short workshop on sound as well, and we'll be producing a zine of this, of your work, which you can have as a nice memory. Blimey, Neil, 2 days, that's a lot to fit in, I know. That's why I'm so excited. And next week on The Extra Mile, you'll hear a little of the scouting visit. That's my plan anyway. So if you'd like to take part and come to London, go to the website, photowalk.show, hit the Encounters tab. All details are there. Right. Part 1 of 2 parts today, featuring my guest this week. I've already introduced you at the start of the show to Claire Thomas. I feel like so many of our discussions become a kind of introduction to a life behind the lens, and really they open themselves to a second visit. And indeed, after the chat that we had, we agreed to talk again to take, as the YouTubers say, a deeper dive into particular projects of hers. A keen horse rider, which is pertinent to this story, a motorcyclist, which is a chat for another time, an adventurer, and nature enthusiast. Claire has undertaken several independent photo projects in diverse and very remote corners of the world, including Alaska, Wyoming, Mozambique, and more recently, Mongolia, where she photographed the iconic Kazakh eagle hunters of the Altai Mountains. And today, I think it's the first time I've openly mentioned it, but one of the places I've just mentioned is going to be particularly precious to this podcast in 2026. Now that's planning ahead. As I said in the introduction, today's conversation certainly changes tack. Where we start is not at all like the conclusion, which I know seems obvious when you talk about the journey of a conversation, but this takes sharper turns than many of my chats. Here's my guest, part 1 of our chat today, 2 parts on the show, Claire Thomas.
Claire, have camera will travel were the first 4 words that came to mind as I started to unpick your wonderful introduction to a life making stories with a camera. It all starts with horses, though, in rural Wales, and then leads to America, which is a fascinating way to start this. So how does that work?
Well, I mean, I feel like horses are the theme of my life. Everywhere I go, I'm drawn to them. But I was very lucky, and I grew up in the lovely Welsh countryside, and my family weren't into horses at all, but something drew me to horses from the age of 4. So, I grew up and I was indulged with riding lessons, and then I had to work with horses, mucking out and things. And that's when I really learned like how to be around horses and their behavior and everything. And anyway, this stuck with me throughout my adolescence and early adulthood. And then when I was at university, I went to Wyoming to work on a ranch during the summer. And it blew my mind because I really had no idea that this cowboy culture still exists out west in the US. And it was beautiful. During that time, I started to see, it was a guest ranch. So people from all over the world were coming to ride horses for a week, and then we would take them on trail rides. And a lot of them had these beautiful cameras. And I liked taking pictures at that point with, a very small point and shoot. But I didn't know anything about photography. And I think the guests at the ranch kind of inspired me, and I would see their pictures and I started to think about it in a slightly different way. And that was the beginning, really. It was, trying to get pictures of horses, the landscapes. And now I feel like I've kind of come full circle. I've been lucky to photograph a lot of different things. And nowadays I do a lot of stories related to horses and communities that depend on them.
Often it's like a mum or a dad or a grandfather or another member of the family. But in your case, then, it was complete strangers with cameras that were your inspiration.
Yes, definitely. Yeah,
I love it.
And I think it just developed over time. I can't really pinpoint a moment where I thought, I'd quite like photography, but I just sort of fell into it. And then, actually, there was a moment, I guess. After I'd worked on the ranch one summer, I went on a kind of around the world backpacking trip, as many of us do when we take a gap year. And I just took a bunch of pictures on a point and shoot camera. And I quite liked some of them. They were images of nature in Thailand, beaches, and, the normal stuff. And the following summer, I went back to the ranch and I'd printed some of these pictures off, and I was showing them to my boss, the head wrangler, Heath, his name is. Heath is a man of few words. Everybody knows that about him. Compliments are hard to come by from him, but when he does give a compliment, it really packs a punch kind of thing. And all he said to me, he looked at the pictures and he said, "I think you should invest in a good camera." And that was it. Those words, it really hit me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. And then I went and got, I think my first camera was a small Pentax.
He sounds like he could have been a very important mentor, but you had another one. I'm not quite sure how the timing works out here, but Jason Tanner was a mentor for you as well, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right. And still is. I owe him a lot. I don't think I could have done any of it really without Jason. So there were a number of years where I was traveling and kind of developing my skill in photography and my interest in it, and just trying to figure out which direction I wanted to go in. And this took many years. So I was, doing so many different jobs, teaching English in Spain, volunteering in Ghana, working on the ranch. I was there for 7 summers. So that kind of funded a lot of my travels. And then I don't know what happened, but I think it was during a trip in Ghana, I decided that I wanted to use my camera for storytelling purposes, which I really knew nothing about, but I was very drawn to it. So I started to look into this. I didn't really know anything about photojournalism. I'd studied politics, nothing related to photojournalism or photography. And so I started reaching out to photographers and photojournalists, and I stumbled across Jason's work. And his work is brilliant. And I knew that was exactly the kind of stuff I wanted to cover. So I reached out to him, and he's been incredibly generous ever since, guiding me, giving me absolutely brilliant advice, constructive criticism. And we continue to discuss things. I mean, photojournalism is a complicated industry that's always changing. So, it's good to have some friends who are familiar with it.
I think it's one of those facets of photography that I find really encouraging, that photojournalists like Jason are on the whole very generous, very encouraging, because whilst there are books you could read and films you can watch of and about experience, having a mentor like this, somebody who's keen to share, is fabulous in what can be a very unusual occupation. I mean, let's be honest, this sort of real world experience is just not taught in a classroom.
Yes, I like that. It is an unusual occupation, a very challenging one in many different ways for many reasons, but equally rewarding, of course. But yeah, I think, especially as a freelancer, I think it's different for, staff photographers, staff photojournalists. But in the freelance community, it's essential, I think, to have others, and to support each other. And I was very lucky to have that in abundance, really, whilst I was based in Iraq. That was one of the things I loved about it the most. I mean, I'm crazy about Iraq. That I lived there for almost 3 years, and it was the most rewarding time, professionally for me. And we had this beautiful community of photojournalists and freelance writers, aid workers, many of whom were women.
You mentioned that you have a degree in politics. I would imagine that's been really important when it comes to this desire to tell stories about social issues.
And yes, as a driver, definitely. It would be more helpful if I could remember any of it. I'm not sure there's much I remember, but it definitely sparked an interest in current affairs, obviously political issues. And I think I did do some studying of military conflicts. I studied just war theory. And until then, I didn't really know that I had an interest in learning more about conflicts. And so, yes, I think that it gave me a little bit of background knowledge, not as much because I wasn't a particularly good student, because I just learned better from seeing something for myself. And that's kind of how I ended up going to Iraq. One of the first stories I covered was the refugee crisis in Europe. So I went to Calais, to the refugee camp, which was known as the jungle. Yeah. And there I was meeting quite a lot of Kurdish families from northern Iraq who'd fled ISIS. And I think I really wanted to try and find out for myself what had driven these people to take these enormous risks and leave everything they knew behind to come to Europe, where they didn't know anybody, they didn't speak the language. And it was quite inspiring. And everybody, oh my gosh, the people there were so welcoming. I was really moved by the Iraqi people, also the Afghans and the Sudanese, but everybody in the camp was so hospitable, even though they didn't have much. They were staying there in temporary accommodations, but they would insist that I eat with them and share stories. It was just very lovely. So that was kind of what encouraged me to see if I could go to Iraq. And I didn't know if I could because I'm a freelancer. I don't have any big media organization to support me or anything. But I found that it was easy to enter Erbil, the capital of the Kurdistan region, visa on arrival. And then once I got there, I realized that it's very easy to get to Mosul from there. And so I started to cover issues more closely on the front line, as well as, the humanitarian situation surrounding the conflict.
We'll come to your time in Iraq and Mosul shortly. I want to rewind, if I can, to Ghana, because that's pretty much where this really begins, where the photojournalism begins, isn't it, really? I know you were there volunteering, working with women living with AIDS, HIV, and I know from reading your bio, it was a very humbling experience. This is where the photojournalist's story starts, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Until then, I had just been taking travel images, which I really enjoyed, and I still do very much. But I didn't see it as being my profession, Yeah. And then when I was in Ghana, I was visiting these women, as you said, who were living with HIV and AIDS. And I was there, doing some education programs to raise awareness. So I was trying to find ways that I could help in other ways. So I asked the women if I could take their picture inside their homes. And I asked them what is one thing that would make their lives easier. And they all said that they would like to have a bed because, they were very poor. Really, really struggling to just survive, living in extreme poverty. And none of them had a mattress. They were just sleeping on a sheet on the concrete, really. Anyway, so I took the pictures and I thought, right, so I'll try and see if I can raise a little bit of money to at least get everybody a mattress. So the organization I was with were supporting about 77 women and some men living with HIV. Anyway, I quickly realized that once I made this fundraising campaign and put some of the pictures up with the women's permission, of course, people started to donate. And I guess that was a bit of a milestone because it made me see how pictures can transform emotions into action that can benefit people positively. And it moved me.
There is another pivotal picture and experience that, along with your time in Ghana, certainly forged a path for you to become a a professional photographer, or at least gave you this enormous confidence boost. And that was when you were still on your travels. You were making travel pictures, and you entered a competition, didn't you?
Yeah. I had submitted a picture to National Geographic when they had the Your Shot platform, which they still do, but now it's on Instagram. And it was just a picture of a camel yawning in front of the pyramids. I didn't think anything of the picture. It was quite quirky, I guess. But anyway, I remember waking up in Barcelona, going to my teaching job and finding an email from a National Geographic editor saying we would like to publish this photo in the magazine. And my jaw dropped. I had, had absolutely no idea that was even possible from where I'd submitted it. And then they said, and we need your invoice as soon as possible. And I was like, okay, invoice, great. So how much for? And they were like, it's $4,200 or something.
Right.
And I couldn't believe it. It was life-changing. It really was. I was never been so happy. So I think that was a real catalyst. That was the moment where I said, right, there might be some money in this. I might be able to make it work professionally. Of course, I didn't know then that was a fluke, that most publications don't pay anywhere near that amount. However, it was a good moment. And I then left my job teaching and I moved temporarily to Palestine, to the West Bank. And that's where I started to produce photo essays.
Photojournalism often requires this sort of unique blend of artistic vision. There is the business side, which you've mooted already, and then there's this journalistic integrity, all sort of in one thing. How do you balance all those aspects in your work? Because making photographs, sometimes in tricky situations where you're personally very affected by what you're seeing as well, is not the easiest canvas, is it?
No, it's quite tricky. You're right, because a lot of us might be very good at the creative side of it, but not necessarily so good at selling the images or the story afterwards, which is true in my case. I really feel very, very passionate about capturing stories, telling stories through images as well as words. I love interviewing people. I think that's what I love most about the job, is connecting with people and feeling so honored, really, and humbled that people are so willing to share their stories with me. And then on the other side of it, I find it really hard when you have to make money out of that story. That's challenging, and emotionally and literally, actually, it's not so easy to sell stories these days in a very oversaturated industry. On the emotional side, I think I manage it quite well through, decompressing. I'm quite good at recognizing when I'm not feeling good or if something's impacted me and talking about it and just getting out into nature. I feel so lucky that I'm able to do that and go back to Wales. And I mean, at the end of the conflict in Mosul, I took some time, a couple of months, I think, to go back to Wales and just process everything. Then couldn't wait to get back to Iraq, of course. But it can be a tricky juggle in many ways.
There's a particular photograph, for example, of yours in a field hospital. I use that description with tempered feelings because I look around the room at this extraordinary scene and it does not look like a field hospital at all. It was in Mosul's old town. There were children being treated. Two things occurred to me actually about that scene. There's operations and treatment going on. There's parents put a foot away and the doctors working the very best that they can with ripped surgical gloves.
Oh, yes, I know.
It's that feeling of, do you need me to step in? Is there anything I can do?
Oh, God, yes. Oh, yeah, you've touched on something very emotive. I struggled with this. The first few days, especially when I was in that field clinic, or they called them trauma stabilization points, right. TSPs or field clinic, whatever. Very basic setup. And I struggled when I was there the first few days because I did want to help, and there were very few women medics. That most of the medics were men. And so when the female casualties were coming, it's quite a conservative culture, they would want to be treated by a woman. And so they would come to me and I felt completely hopeless and disappointed in myself that there was nothing I could do. So I struggled with that in the beginning, and I thought about just quitting and going home and studying medicine, or to be a paramedic, and then realized there was absolutely no way I'd be able to do that anyway. And so I just then tried to focus on what I can do. and that is to, document this to the best of my ability while supporting the medics. So I was embedded at that point with Iraqi Special Forces medics and a group called Global Response Management, and they're international volunteer medics. And so I made sure they knew that if there was something I could do to help, that I would rather do that. And oftentimes it would mean just, grab the gauze, hold the light. So I try and get shrapnel out of this woman's hip.
Good Lord.
And one of the most profound and moving moments of that whole period for me was accompanying a medic who became my friend, Katie, this extraordinary young woman from Australia. And it was during a mass casualty incident at the clinic. They were overwhelmed with casualties. It was full. There were bodies everywhere. There just weren't enough medics to treat everybody. And Katie was treating a young girl, say maybe 8 or 9. And this child had multiple gunshot wounds, a bowel evisceration, and she was just in a terrible state. So Katie was rushing to get her into an ambulance and looking around for a medic to go with her. There wasn't anybody available. So I said, look, I'll come. There's nothing I can do, but I'll come with you. And I left my camera at the clinic. And it was remarkable because as soon as we got into the ambulance, there's nothing in the ambulance. There's no stretcher or medical supplies. It's just a metal bench and it's 50 degrees inside there. Yeah. And then the child stopped breathing because she had a collapsed lung. And so Katie was like, can you just hold her on your lap? And I mean, we're bouncing over these war-torn roads, rushing to get to the hospital. And Katie just performed a needle decompression on this child, and suddenly she started breathing again. It was a very impactful moment. And we hope she survived, but we don't actually know, unfortunately, because we dropped her off at the hospital. Hopefully, she went straight into surgery, and then we had to rush back. But yeah, there were moments that will stay with me forever where I didn't capture with my camera.
In those moments, are you able to think about yourself and your safety and what's possibly on the road ahead of you?
I mean, I think adrenaline just kicks in, and you just somehow I found, and I don't think you can know this about yourself until you're in that situation, but in the most intense situations, I found myself quite calm. I felt like I was able to manage those situations relatively well, because I thought, you've got absolutely no control. There's nothing you can do. You don't know what lies ahead. So I felt like the only thing you can possibly do to maintain your mental health and help mitigate the risks really is to stay calm and think things through properly.
I would imagine this approach to risk, this understanding of the actual amount, you can really impact a situation in terms of providing safety for yourself. This incredible resilience has been the most revelatory experience, because in 20 minutes, albeit fast forwarding through elements of your life, we've gone from making pictures on a ranch because others were doing so to assisting in life or death filled operations. I can't imagine, and I would ask this question of anybody that photographs what you do, whether you've surprised yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I had no idea. Yeah. Not a clue. I remember going to the front line the first day, not knowing how I would deal with it, because I don't think anything can prepare you for it. And running, taking cover from ISIS sniper fire and almost dodging bullets. I mean, the first day I went to the front line, I always think I shouldn't share this anecdote because it's a bit morbid, but I had a very, very close call. A couple of close calls, but we were chatting with the Iraqi soldiers close to the front line, not on the front line, but they were taking a break. They were having their lunch. And the battle was a little bit ahead. They were liberating a village near Mosul. Anyway, we were just sitting down, taking a break, and these soldiers asked me to stand up for a picture with them. And I agreed. I mean, I'm always taking pictures of them, so I thought, at that moment, I thought, okay, that's fine, I'll stand up for a picture with you. And they took my helmet off. And in that moment, I heard a bullet whiz past my ear. Ooh. And the soldiers burst out laughing, and they thought it was hilarious, and I didn't understand why. And they said, well, when you hear the bullet, it means it didn't kill you, so you survived something today.
And my thanks to Claire Thomas, who will return soon. Your stories very precious to this show. I'd love to hear from you. Write to stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show. You're such an important part of the podcast. What you write in with gives our community a real uniqueness. I think of this, and I really do, it's not just a liner on a piece of paper. I think of this as a podcast with you very much at the heart of it. We write this thing together. We do. You might have noticed Sir Barker. I have referenced him today, Barney. Barney, come on, come this way. Oh, he's looking a bit sheepish today. What's the matter, eh? Come here. What's the matter? I wanted him to bark, but nothing. No barking today. He's got a bit of a dodgy tummy. I don't want to go into it, and I'm sure you don't want me to either. But I brought out his treats. You know he likes to do some ASMR, chombling through his treats, and he hasn't touched one of them. The only dogs that have touched the treats today are two passers-by. And you'll never believe these names. Well, I'll tell you anyway. It was Bet Tiddler, rhymes with Midler. Oh, perfect. Just at the right. Did you like Bet? She stole some of your treats. And the other one was, what was the... another dog's name. Oh, who was the other dog? Named after a country star. I've just forgotten, pups. It was a brilliant name. I hope we meet them again. Yes, do you want a treat now? Is this time? Come on then. Let's get these out. Let's see if you want one. Come on, who was it? It was a brilliant dog's name. So brilliant, I can't remember it. Right, come on then. Here we go. No? Okay. Come on, this way. So yes, as I said, you very much make the show with your letters that you write in. And to that effect, let's have one from our longest time supporters, Tim Bindner, who I think has been with us really pretty much from the start. Sometimes you come up with the most amazing whys to marry nicely with a final question to our guests, which has become a real trademark of signing off on this show. And this from Tim, I think, is fabulous. It certainly had me thinking about my own why again. From Tim then, Google, he says, states your why is a statement of purpose that describes why you do the work you do and why you live the lifestyle you do. It's your calling. It's your conviction. And I've been thinking about the why of my life. Just as much as happiness is something that's unique for every single person, the why seems to differ from person to person, obviously. My friend Wes said to me, God has created you with gifts and abilities and experience and personality to impact the world. No other person has the combination of these things, just you. And then he added, it's the very same God who created all those mountains you like snapping. No wonder you like nature, you got the same creator, common bond. See, Tim, and I know people will have very different beliefs who listen to this show when it comes to creation, but that did make me smile. It was a wry smile at the analogy. Tim says, at age 55, I'm sometimes still trying to figure out my purpose in life. Defining my why is part of that journey. I have a good job that I like, but that doesn't define me. It's not my so-called calling, but I work and I work hard and leave work when I log off. My focus is on my why of life outside of work. I know the things that make me happy, but is there a purpose to them in my life? Well, back in 2019, I wrote a blog about my legacy, and I will link to that because it's a reasonably long piece, and I'd like you to read the whole thing with a Garibaldi and a cup of coffee, obviously, and I'll put that on the show page today. Many of the questions I had then, says Tim, I still seem to have now. But since I wrote it, I've survived the pandemic, a heart attack, the passing of my mother, my son moving out, a stomach cancer scare, and 50 pounds of weight loss. My mental health journey has vastly improved, but it's still, understandably, not always great. I feel my why, and this is Tim's creative why atop his personal why, which is his wife and son. I feel my why truly comes from two things: my photography and my writing. These are the only true things I can control and are uniquely my own. As I grow, learn and practice photography, I am getting better at it. My psychologist has always tried to get me to say my work is great. I'm not so sure I'll ever feel that way. I have, however, compromised and admitted some of my pictures are good. I strive to improve. The why, says Tim, of my photography is the fact that I'll have some pictures to share later in life. I shoot only for myself and what I want, and a bonus is, well, maybe sometimes others enjoy them too. A few people have even purchased my prints, but my goal when I shoot is to share the beauty I recognise in the world, and that is why I do it. My writing, like photography, is unique to me. I write about topics that I want to. I put my own thoughts and perspectives behind the topics. I do bare my soul. I convey with complete honesty the points in each post. I've never admitted I'm right or an expert on any subject, but I do pour my heart out based on my honest opinion and my experiences in life. Multiple people have either identified with the messages in my blogs or even told me I never thought of that after reading one. But better still, some have praised me for my vulnerability and honesty and willingness to share. My why is this exercise. I'll not change the world, I'll not cure cancer, star in a great movie or save somebody's life, but if my photography and or blog posts help one person or bring at least one person joy, then my why has been defined and fulfilled. Wow, Tim, some thoughts there. I will link to your legacy piece, which is very well written, beautifully written, on the show page today. And I concur that photography and writing, how important are they in our lives? Great generalization, I know. Maybe not both are important to everybody, but I think, Tim, you and I are kindred spirits on that one. I think writing and being able to convey your thoughts, and in many respects, this is that for me, Tim. This is my blog, if you like. So thank you so much for your letter. And I'll pop some pictures on the show page of yours today as well. Plus, of course, have a link to your Flickr with some extraordinary work on there. Oh! By the way, I've just remembered the dog's name that I was trying to remember. It was a Cocker Spaniel. Musician, Joe Cocker, obviously. It's all a bit threadbare at the moment, as you can imagine. Trees and bushes and, it's that time of the year. But I quite like the chaos you can achieve through photographing just branches, just twigs, just intertwining. And Neil, what are you talking about? I don't know. I'm trying to share my enthusiasm for photographing a tree in the midst of winter, a bush in the midst of winter. And that person over there, you can't see him, but they're looking at me thinking, what is he photographing? It's just a bare tree, huh? Right, before the second part of my chat with Claire, a triptych now of short wintry letters with the pictures as ever on the show page. Now, if you haven't visited the show page before, please make this the week that you do. Either go to photowalk.show and go to this episode on the episodes tab, number 466 for this one, or follow the link on your podcast player app, which will open the page in your browser flavour of choice. First one then. Last week, we were making some, well, I'm now going to call them light dusting of snow pictures, following the photographs that our friend Lynn Fraser sent in from the Highlands. Some beautiful, proper Scottish snowy pictures, which I shall pop on the show page today, with a link to a story about the shoot, which is on Lynn's Substack. There are some fantastic, and I've put one on the show page, there are some fantastic minimalist black and white ones in there as well. Just wonderful. So there's a reason to take a coffee and half a packet of Garibaldi's to the show page today. Then this from David Lord Lensington of Higton. Hello again, Neil. Following Bob from San Francisco, talking on the start of the month live Zoom about making images when he has insomnia. There we go. I love it when a plan comes together because you heard Bob's letter earlier on in the show. I found myself awake at night at 1 a.m. Not an unusual thing these days. The snow was falling thick and fast. So rather than read a book whilst my cuppa cooled, decaf of course, I reached for my camera and made the attached image, which I've popped on the show page. Upon looking at it, I may have taken inspiration from another extra miler. Could it have been Gary Waits? I think it might have been, who has a project where he takes a picture of half an object. If I've got that wrong, and Dave's got that wrong, apologies. It might have been that, or it might have been that it was too horrible to go outside, so I had to use whatever viewpoint our house allows. Exposure 1/10, f6.3, ISO 12800, and noise reduction using DxO Pure Raw 3. Easy, David, I'm getting a nosebleed. I then decided to make an image of the whole tree, so I used a 12mm lens and made another image of the whole tree out of the window with a square crop. But perhaps half a tree is better than a whole one. Those pictures are on the show page, and I'm beginning to get this feeling that there is a whole crew of us waking up in the dead of night to make pictures. See, Bob, you have started something with this insomnia project. And then the third in our triptych comes from Mark Krajnak in New Jersey, who sent in celebration pictures from his Hogmanay celebrations in America land. Do you remember, before I read the note, that New Year was essentially cancelled in the capital of celebrating New Year, that being Edinburgh, due to the high winds and the storms? There's an entire city now, I'm sure, that's stuck in 2024 because the big fireworks thing didn't happen. They're in a kind of stasis. I've been to a Hogmanay party in Edinburgh. You cannot match it. It was many moons ago, granted, but there's a wonderful, wonderful theme to it, or feeling to it, that you just don't get in the leafy shires of England land, that's for sure. Ours, including this year, become a bit samey. And as much as I love you, Jules Holland, as a musician, Hootenanny, the TV show, has perhaps hooted its last for me. I think I may have to don my tartan for 25-26. There's a hint. If you live in Edinburgh, I'm coming to your pad this next year. And if you're wondering what all the fuss is about, what's Hogmanay? It is Scotland's big New Year's Eve celebration. And you go on things like first footing, where you knock on the door of a complete stranger to be the first to wish them a happy new year. And then you demand a wee drum or something like that. Then they've got the fireworks, and you throw wish notes into a bonfire, as you're about to hear, and then you sing Auld Lang Syne with a proper passion over and over and over until it's January the 2nd. Anyway, hello Neil and team. As I listened to episode 464 and heard you talk about Scotland missing out on their New Year's activities, I thought I'd share that here in central New Jersey, we did participate in a Scottish tradition, Hogmanay. I live in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, a mid-sized historical town established 1697 and about 15 minutes away from Princeton, New Jersey. Now, every New Year's Eve, a bonfire is built by the local Boy Scouts at Brearley House, a historic abode built in 1761. I think when you're built in 1761, you earn the title abode. Because the town has a large Scottish heritage, it's observed Hogmanay, I was told, since the 1970s. Though I've lived in the town for a few years, this was my first time going to it. And it was interesting and very enjoyable. A couple of food trucks serving snacks and hot chocolate, a bagpiper, and the option to tour Brearley House. I asked one lass what she wrote on her paper before it was tossed into the fire, and she said, "In the new year, I want to stop saying yes to everything." Some photos from my Fuji X-T3 attached. Cheers for a happy and healthy 2025. Best regards, Mark Krajnak in New Jersey. I put some links to his website because he's been blogging since 2008. There's a fair amount to go and read. And Mark, I think we're still okay to say Happy New Year, at least for another week. If you'd like to send some pictures, some thoughts in, then the email address is stories@photowalk.show. Right, let's return to Claire Thomas for part 2 of our conversation today.
I try to put myself in sometimes when I'm talking to photographers that do the extraordinary work that you do. I try to put myself when I'm thinking of questions, and I try to put myself in the space of a loved one, maybe one of your parents, or and I think, well, what would they ask? And I think the first thing that they might ask is, what motivates you?
Yeah, they might use slightly more vulgar language than that.
Okay, I was tempering it.
Oh God. Luckily, it's often, in the beginning it was like, why on earth would you do something so stupid and reckless? But I don't think there's a very good answer to that, at least not for me. I'm not entirely sure what draws me to, or what drew me to go there in the first place, other than, curiosity for sure. And I definitely feel that there is enormous value in documenting these things. I think that's really important. And I think because of the pictures that I've seen from other photographers, they're so moving and impactful and important. And I think that inspired me partly. And then once I was there and discovered that actually I can do this, I am capable, so I should keep going. And it just felt really important to me. I went to Iraq the first time for 2 weeks, and I thought that would be enough. I did a number of stories during that time, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. So I then stayed for another 2.5 years and keep going back as any opportunity I can. It's my second home at this point.
I don't know whether this is a crass question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Does it? I think it would frustrate the living daylights out of me. But does it frustrate you that we have this incessant feed and this need to know about celebrity? For example, I was filling up my car with fuel earlier today, and I just peered at the newspapers that were there at the door as I went in to pay, and I don't think I saw any news. I really don't. All I saw were names that I'm not particularly interested in. Well, I'm thinking, my wife has a phrase for it. She calls it a "so what" story, and all I could see was an array of "so what" stories. So for somebody like yourself who tells, now I know the news has to be balanced. We don't all want to read, well, we don't want to read all the time about life's woes and problems.
Yeah.
But it's important that we do learn about humans and humanity. And I don't feel that comes when I'm reading about celebrities.
Oh my gosh, no, not at all. And you're right, there has to be a balance. And nowadays, I don't think there is the desire for balance. It's just commercial gain. It's all about clickbait and what sells newspapers. And very often that is just celebrity gossip. And it's a distraction as well, I think. Yeah, people don't have an appetite to know the reality of what's going on, and I think that's really a shame. And I think there are some newspapers, some media publications that do that more justice, do put out more balanced stories. But I definitely find that very depressing. And I mean, it's reflected in my own experience of how much I struggle to get stories published nowadays. Unless it's something very sensational, it just doesn't get a lot of interest. I do a lot of positive stories, which I'm very drawn to, especially in Iraq, because now Iraq, I think, is in, a relatively good phase. It's pretty peaceful. And I did a story that I've been working on for over a period of 1.5 years about an equine therapy center in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And to me, that was such a brilliant story. It was helping Yazidi women who had survived ISIS captivity and then taking them to this horse center. To me, it was just one of the most moving things I've ever seen. And like taking pictures of them when they were getting close to the horses and their faces lighting up and just seeing that, real moment of release and like relief and just pure joy of being close to these massive animals. Anyway, I really struggled to get it published. I did eventually. It was published by Newsweek. But I was surprised by how little appetite there was and interest for a story like that.
From that practical standpoint then, how do you, I mean, I would imagine that you've become much better at selling, you've had to, with your freelance hat on, enthusing upon news desks that this is a story that really needs to run.
Well, you'd think so, but gosh, it just never gets any easier. No, it's a challenging aspect of the industry because you kind of have to be a salesperson, and this doesn't come naturally to me at all. I'm not very good at sort of bragging about just selling an idea. I can do it better in person, I think, but writing pitches never seems to get any easier. And I remember, I'll share an anecdote with you. I remember the first time I met the Sunday Times picture editor, Ray Wells. He became a very good friend of mine. And I remember they were publishing some of my work from Mosul. I remember meeting him, and within seconds of meeting, he just went on an enormous rant about how he was like, it doesn't matter what kind of picture and what risks you've taken. It could be the most impactful image of conflict or whatever. And then if somebody sends in a picture of a surfing rabbit, nobody's going to care about your conflict image anymore. Something like that. I was more emphatic. But I think he was disappointed as well in the way the industry was turning.
The positive stories that you do show, and you show plenty of them, and I'll leave links to your work, because I think it is important that the stories told have a positive impact as well. I was particularly drawn to another one of your pictures of Abdul Hamal, who fled Afghanistan, but then he returned to work in his shop. It was supported by the work of agencies and bodies like UNHCR, which I know you do photographic work for. I would imagine they're the moments where you think, oh, this is fabulous. I'm seeing the positive side of all these agencies working to make the world a better place.
Oh, gosh, yes, exactly. That's what I've loved working with many of the UN agencies because of that. And it's quite moving because, yes, they tell you exactly how agencies like UNHCR have supported them and helped them amongst as well as other agencies and international NGOs. I love that. And then you get to take their picture and tell their story. So I really enjoy having the opportunity to document positive things like that. Actually, when I was in Afghanistan, one of the main things we were focused on there too was education of women and the increased access to formal education for women and girls. And it was really positive and hopeful at that time. So it was quite, it's very sad to see how things have regressed so drastically now.
Greenpeace, Amnesty International, Oxfam, Save the Children, these are all massive organisations that you have and continue to work with. I'm fascinated about how you personally build relationships in this area.
Oh, God, it's a lot of persistent email writing, basically, and a bit of luck. For me, when I was based in Iraq long enough that people began to know that I was there, because after the war ended in Mosul, most photographers and most reporters left, and I stayed to sort of document the aftermath. And then, it was just a case of sending out emails to basically every communications department of I made a list of all the NGOs that I would like to contribute to, and just a lot of computer time. I spent a lot of time in cafes researching who to contact, following up emails, sending CVs, portfolios, this and that. I mean, it's a lot of unanswered emails, but you get there eventually. And it helped that I happened to be based in a place where all of these agencies were operating at the time, and all of these organizations, and they needed somebody based there with a visa. So that definitely helped. And then I was just lucky to catch an opportunity with the United Nations Development Programme. As their photographer was leaving, I happened to email and say, I'm here, I'm available, sent a link to my work. I got a contract with UNDP. I worked with them for 2 years, I think. And that was a milestone because they sent me all over the country to document projects that they were doing to rehabilitate areas affected by ISIS. And I loved it, absolutely loved it, because when people criticize, UN agencies, I understand there are problems. It's never perfect. But I did see firsthand some of the positive impacts they have and how, they rebuild people's homes, they rebuild hospitals. Then I would go and, take pictures of surgeries that were taking place in these newly built hospital wards and units. I spent time with families. I got to spend a night at a university in the girls' dorm that had been rebuilt by UNDP. So yeah, I felt very lucky to be able to tell all of these positive stories in a place that had seen so much devastation.
When you're working for these organisations, you're still a freelancer, I assume, aren't you?
Yes.
So
luckily, yes.
Yeah. Well, you say luckily. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of freedom that comes with it, but there's a lot of limitations too. Like, where do you stay? Who keeps you safe? Who can you trust? All those questions of being a staffer means you don't need to think quite so much about. There are some areas, of course, you do need to think a lot about, but it seems to me that a visa alone can be a daunting task to organise when you're going across some borders, can't it? So, but you've got everything else. You've got to find yourself a fixer. You've got to find yourself a place to stay. You do have to embrace the idea of finding somebody you can trust.
Exactly. And that's where all of the pieces kind of fell into place for me in Iraq in a way that hasn't really happened anywhere else that I've worked. It was just fortunate that I already had a place to live, so I didn't have to think about that, and rent was cheap, and I lived in a house with 6 people. Yeah. I loved where I was living, so that was good. And I discovered that working as a contractor as opposed to a staffer for a UN agency suits my personality better, because I do like to pursue my own stories as well.
Yeah.
And in the context of Iraq, it gave me much greater flexibility to move around Mosul and other parts of the country without security details. When I was on official UN missions, we were in a convoy of armored vehicles, which was fine, but then everything is contained within their security framework, which can be quite limiting when you want to spend time to get pictures and talk to people. Whereas because I was a contractor, I wasn't an employee, so I could just go with like the local engineers and stay overnight. So yeah, it afforded me much greater flexibility in that regard. And it allowed me to pursue lots of other personal projects and work with other organizations as well. So yeah, that worked better for me. I always thought I would, before I got into photojournalism, I did try to get a job with an international aid organization or a UN agency, but it just didn't quite fit for me. And as difficult as the freelance life is, I love it. I really appreciate the freedom it gives you.
Well, the freedom at the moment is taking you to Cairo. So you have all sorts of bases. As I said right at the start, Have Camera Will Travel. At the moment, you've travelled to Cairo, which is it a new base of yours, or have you been there for a while as well?
I've been here a while. So my husband is from here.
Yeah.
He's Egyptian. So that's why I'm in Cairo. And I love it. We've been here 2.5 years now. And we met in Baghdad, actually. And then we were in New York for a while. And now we're here. And Cairo is actually a very good base for me because I'm close to Iraq. I can get back there easily. If I want to go to Africa. So, and Cairo in itself, of course, is a phenomenal city. It's so interesting. And it's the start. It's kind of touching because it's the place that started my career, with that lucky picture of the camel yawning. So it's quite interesting that I've ended up here. I
asked this question recently of our guest, Ted Forbes, how or why still images continue to have the impact that they do. You've worked long enough now in photojournalism to understand or to have an answer to that, of course. What's your take on this impact that a still image has that perhaps moving images, video images, don't?
Good question. I think moving images also are very, effective. But yeah, definitely for me, it's the picture that transports you more. I don't know. I think still images will always have a place in capturing people's attention because it's the first thing you see when you look at a newspaper or a magazine. The first thing that you see is the image before you read the text. And we're always going to be looking for those pictures that cause you to linger long enough to read what the story is about. And I think nowadays with artificial intelligence and AI-generated images, credible photography and credible photojournalism is more important than ever. And I think, there'll be more of an importance, or more of an emphasis rather, on credible sources, credible people then, that are not artificially generating their images.
Well, away from these areas, the incredible places that you work in, more recently you visited Mongolia. Now, I have to mention this because we're interested in taking the podcast to Mongolia, in particular to photograph the iconic Kazakh eagle hunters who you've spent time with. Tell me about your experience. And when I was explaining this the other day to somebody, I talked about the eagle hunters, and they looked at me, they were horrified. There's people hunting eagles. How can they do that? Such majestic creatures. And I said, oh, no. They use the eagles to hunt. But it's the most extraordinary, or they are the most extraordinary people, because it's often quite barren landscape where they're living, in very cold conditions sometimes as well, in the winters anyway. What did you find? Well, I'm fascinated.
Oh my God. I'm so glad you're going. It is a magical place. Yeah, it's one of the most incredible places and the most amazing people I've ever met. So I first went in 2019, and I've been going back ever since.
Right, every year?
Almost every year. I didn't go in 2020 or 2021, and I went twice this year, or last year, 2024. But I was there more recently in October. I lead photo tours now in Mongolia.
Yes.
So into the Altai Mountains and then other parts of the country as well. And I just love being able to share my passion for this place with people and seeing them love it as much as I do. But it is fascinating. Yeah, the birds, nothing can prepare you for being in such close proximity to these massive birds of prey. Yeah. And then seeing the connection they have with their handlers and how difficult they can be. This time we saw a master eagle hunter training a new bird, and it just looked so difficult. And then it gives you a really good appreciation for when it works really well. But it is amazing, and they respect the birds. They look after them exceptionally well. They become part of the family. After a number of years, they release them back into the wild. And even getting on a horse is with an eagle on your arm is crazy to me. I don't know how they do it.
Well, you might well have been able to do that then because of your background with riding and horses, ranching. Were you able to do that bit as well?
Well, I never tried to mount a horse with an eagle on my arm. So I'd get on the horse and then they'd give it to me. But yeah, I held an eagle on my arm just while on a horse, but not for long. I think that's something I need to do more of, perhaps, is more handling, because when I'm there, I'm so focused on just getting their photo. I don't think too much about trying it myself. Also, not that it makes me, it does make me a little nervous actually, because I don't know birds. I'm very good with horses, dogs, I'm comfortable, but birds, that's an alien thing to me. I love them. I have so much respect, but I'm liable to get my eye plucked out or something.
Oh, don't say that.
They're hooded most of the time. If you're handling them, they're hooded. But yeah, it's a beautiful, rugged, remote area and completely disconnected from the troubles of the outside world somehow. Not that they have access to the internet in most places now in the Altai. Like COVID, for example, they were sort of isolated from it, it's because they just live in these small communities in the middle of nowhere. Oh, it's a remarkable way of life. They just have this beautiful symbiotic relationship with nature. It's quite magical.
I did note, by the way, there were pictures of camels. I know that's the Gobi Desert part of your tours that you do, but you can never quite draw yourself or tear yourself away from the camel picture, can you, Claire?
Yes. There were camels too in the Altai, but not so many.
A radar for them. I end by asking a very short, I use a short word within a question. It's a motivational question, really. I'd be interested to know, what's your why?
Gosh, nosiness, curiosity, let's say. Definitely curiosity and connections. I just love to connect with people and learn about their lives. I feel like this job is such a privilege that it gives you a reason to learn in a very beautiful way about things you wouldn't otherwise have access to. But it's definitely for me about the people.
And my thanks to Claire Thomas for being my guest on the show today. Oh, it's some wonderful. Look at this, pups. There's some very ominous clouds approaching. This might be a good time, I think, to go grab our... I'm not sure if he's going to do it today. It's become sort of a thing that we do. We go grab the... here we go. Picture 1700 shutter speed, f4, 160 ISO. Ominous cloud approaching. As a sketchbook picture. Yeah, usually we go and grab a bite to eat now, bacon, butty and cappuccino time, but I don't know, Pups is out of sorts. He's got that, can we just go home and curl up while you edit? All right, that's it for today. If you can't wait until next Friday and want to walk a little bit further together, then the Extra Mile edition number 122 is waiting for you. And it's our extra show for those who support this podcast through Patreon. You go the extra mile for me, so I go the extra mile for you. This week, Extra Miler Nicola Elliott joins me in a show called Royalty Hanging Off a Horse. And here's a taster of what's waiting for you right now. This bit, by the way, has nothing to do with royalty or horses.
On this week's Extra Mile.
Fun for me is so important. We live once, so life has got to be fun. Which is why I've changed my job so many times. Whatever I was doing stopped being fun. I think it's so important. I mean, photography can be very serious, and we can be very sort of, analytical.
Yeah, very earnest about it.
And oh, absolutely. It can be yes, it's a bit like art.
The really special thing about this show is that you become the star of it. That's the Extra Mile, that is. We find out about our wonderful community through my Shoot the Breeze chats, projects, ideas, inspiration. We chat about all kinds of stuff. And that's what the Extra Mile, that's what it's become at the moment. Our PS to the show is to come, but before that, we need a play-out song just to make some final frames to. I'll think about what's been said today. And I think today I'd like to feature some world music from an artist very dear to me and to this show, actually. This is Hans Johnson, who I suspect will be the soundtrack to our Indian adventure this year in March. Getting closer now, it really is. And I'm choosing a song called Human Connection, which is... part of the title of today's show, of course, for those that are more observant. You are, after all, photographers. And for good reason, really. Connection is something that I think is integral to our photography. It's not always human, yes, but it certainly is for my guest, Claire Thomas, whose life changed the day a very early mentor said to her, I think you should invest in a good camera. The turns our lives make, they can lead you, if you let them, to incredible places and incredible people. So this is Hans Johnson and Human Connection. I love, absolutely adore the way Hans Johnson, and that was called Human Connection, how he records when he's away on location. He records people he meets, sounds that he hears, and he stores them, and then one day they appear in the music that he makes. Fantastic, really. Just a few closing thoughts before the PS today. My sincere thanks to you if you are or you're about to become an extra miler. We'll keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic and walking world together. A safe place to share our thoughts about this thing that we do, photographing and walking. My thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members, and a new member of our team, Michael Mixon, yes, Sir Michael of Mixonville, on the newly constructed research desk, albeit a desk I made, so it has character, i.e. one of the legs is a little bit shorter than the others. Right, a postscript for the show about human connection, of course, today, I think, and who better than to turn to William James, an American philosopher, no relation sadly, and psychologist, and the first educator to offer a psychology course in the United States. He is considered to be a leading thinker of the late 19th century, one of the most influential philosophers of the United States, and, as if he needed an and, the father of American psychology. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, as my granddad said. That's not the quote, by the way. From William James, then. We are like islands in the sea, separate on the surface, but connected in the deep.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.